Shannon, thank you so much for coming and especially
Absolutely.
for bringing all these beautiful samples you've
Yes.
been showing me.
Yes.
Um, I know you come from an education background, and
Mm-hmm.
that's probably why you like teaching all ages. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess you do more adult classes
I
now.
do. I
Uh-huh.
do. But I do work with children sometimes.
And I think it's so important, as with cooking or any other skill, if they learn at a young age,
Mm-hmm.
and it's nothing to be afraid of. And boys, I know both
Exactly.
of my sons enjoyed home ec, I think more than my daughter did,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you can learn things that will help you the rest of your life.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you teach all across the country. You
Mm-hmm.
have classes, but you also work with choosing fabrics, fabric selection,
Mm-hmm.
patterns. And how did you decide you like to do that angle of it?
Well, just working with the craft of quilting and working with fabric, I mean, just when you start playing with fabrics, you just completely fall in love, and then there's just a million different ideas that you come up with and different things that you want to do. And so then it was only natural that I wanted to figure out how to work with children and teach children and get them excited about sewing, about this ancient craft of quilting.
It is an ancient craft.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's go ahead and see how we might start, and then we can show people examples.
Yes. So this is a fun project to do with kids because they're collaging, they're playing, they're exploring. It doesn't have to be very formulaic. They can really express their creativity. So they can come up with any kind of design that they want. And you know, some kids, you can show them the basics of how to do it and then just let them loose, and they're gonna,
Yeah.
create something wonderful. And it might be an abstract piece of art, but as long as they're expressing themselves, I think that's what's important in enjoying it. But as far as some of the kids that might be a little bit more hesitant and need a little bit more guidance for the design, there's a lot of different ways that you can help them to brainstorm ideas for the images that they're gonna create, the design that they're gonna do. So you can flip through children's books, coloring books, look online, look through magazines to help them kind of brainstorm an image. And then once you have an image to start with, I think that's a good starting point. And as far as the materials we need some scrap fabric. So any old scrap fabric that you have around the house.
Even smaller pieces than that, as
Oh,
I noticed
absolutely.
in some of these, just an inch-long piece
Would work just fine. Absolutely. So this project is kind of similar to collaging paper. You might remember the project of collaging a paper heart to make for your Valentine's Day project, something like that. It's very similar, but just with fabric. And then so we need our fabric. We need some kind of big piece of fabric for the background. So some lightweight, light-colored fabric would work well. This is just a white cotton fabric. And then some kind of adhesive. So I like to use fusible web that you can find at any hobby craft store. It's a heat-activated adhesive. I put it on the back of all of the collage fabric. That way the fabric is already, it's dry to the touch, but once they place it down, they create their design, you can just fuse it with the iron and you're done. If you don't want to mess with a fusible web, you could use just Elmer's stick glue. This might cause a little bit more fraying in the fabric, and depending on how tidy your child is, you might have kind of a glue mess.
Workspace.
But you can use whichever of those you're comfortable with. So if you're going to use the fusible web, prep the fabric beforehand.
And do you do it like when it's in a large piece, so you don't cut out the little pieces yet? Okay.
Exactly. I would just put fusible web on the backs of these big pieces of fabric, and then give the fabric to the kiddos to cut down into whatever shapes they want. And depending on the age of your kid, you might want to cut the fabric for them, because I don't like to use some dull scissors for fabric that just doesn't work. So if you have a young kid that you don't want to give sharp fabric scissors, you might want to do the cutting for them.
So then?
Yes. So then you are going to start collaging. So you might trace the design. Some kids, like I said, will just start collaging and just let them at it. But some kids might want to trace their image first. So that's what we did here. We have this tree traced onto the fabric. And then you're just going to start collaging your fabric, just like you do with paper if you're decoupaging or something like that.
And you overlap.
I do.
Some, but you want some of it to be covering up new space.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to layer too much, but you do want to overlap so you don't see too much of the fabric behind. again, this is the kids' project. The goal is for them to have fun with it, to be creative, so we don't have to stress too much about.
And I'm sure in your classes you also talk about, not just with the students or the children, but with adults too, the selection of the shades of fabric, the different hues. You've got patterns, you've got designs.
Exactly, yeah. You'll notice I have some solids in here, some kind of textured solids, some batik fabric. I think that these different textures really help to create kind of a mosaic look, which is what I prefer. But you certainly can go a million different directions as far as the fabric selection. And so they're going to collage their image and then fuse it down with the iron, and that would probably be something that you would do. Or if they're working
have
with
supervision.
Yeah, exactly. If you're working with glue, they would just be gluing each piece before they place it down.
Okay.
You know, and then
voila.
After it's all, even if you're using the glue stick, I would still go ahead and hit it with the iron. That helps to adhere it more. And I would cover with some kind of pressing sheet before you.
It's amazing to see what that looks like starting.
It's a fun transformation, isn't it?
It really is.
Because it's all layered here, and then once it's all fused down, it's kind of, it becomes on one plane, kind of like one piece of fabric. I think it's a really pretty transformation.
Oh, it really is. And then this would, what is this going to be, a wall hanging? Or
it could be
quilt,
whatever you want it to be. So if you're a quilter, you could make your quilt sandwich and then just quilt really densely, and that's all the stitching you would need to do. Or you could show your kiddo, if you're wanting to introduce them to quilting, they could just quilt straight lines and be done with it.
It's a good way to get used to the sewing machine and the speed. And
exactly.
There's really nothing wrong.
No, there's so many different things you can do with it. You can make it into a wall hanging. You can make it into a little tote bag here. And this one we finished with a little satin stitch. But you could leave the edges raw too if you'd prefer.
And I wonder too, would a design like this that's bigger, not any sharp corners, would something like this be a good project to start with?
It would be, and you know, kids love animals, so that's a fun project to work with. So you could cut out the design at this stage and put it on another piece of fabric, or you can leave it like this. If you're not a sewer, you could frame it. You could wrap it around a canvas and staple it on the back side. So there's lots of different things you can do. And
pillow tops.
Exactly. This project, this is a bit more of an older child would do. So we drew the lines for the hills and then where the water is, and then they just filled it in with these different shapes and different tones. So we have these
and different
lighter
sizes,
ones in the back.
whereas those are obviously all
the
long
same.
pieces.
Yep, and here we have some scalloped pieces and then made the tree. And so for this one, a different finishing option, since there were so many different little tiny pieces, we didn't want to stitch around all of that. So we got a piece of tulle, and we sprayed a little bit of temporary adhesive spray over the quilt top, and then laid the piece of tulle on top. So that holds down all of those little raw edges. And then here we stitched across just in straight lines, and they did this simple kind of makeshift binding.
Just a line stitching or channel or whatever.
But again, if you're not a sewer, then you could just frame it or wrap it around a canvas.
This is a wall hanging.
It is a little wall hanging
on the back.
Yeah.
This is really neat. I know a lot of times in free motion quilting, they'll do something and use the tulle to sort of hold it in place.
Especially if you have lots of little bitty tiny pieces.
And then if we want to go on to what I would call an advanced project, at least it's larger.
So this one, we collage the pieces behind onto this background fabric, similarly to how we did this one. And then I did the tree separately. This is one that I did. This wasn't a child's project. So we did the tree separately, similarly to how we did here, except we then cut it out and laid it on top. And here we even have words quilted into the background. These are some of my favorite poems.
So you can really get it as advanced as you want. This is really that same tree, just on a larger scale.
Exactly.
And you have a book, Scrappy Bits Applique, and besides all the beautiful color pictures in it, I noticed there are lots of patterns in the back. So if you want to use some of those maybe to get started, or before you draw your own even.
Absolutely, and this pattern is one of them that's in the book. So there's the sky is the limit as to what you could create.
Well, it's really fun. I appreciate you showing us, and I'm glad to see such an increased and continued interest in quilting in the home arts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There has been quite a resurgence in recent years, especially.
Thank you.
Thank you.